morning. Let's have everybody in the room introduce themselves because we're not as visible to them as they are visible to us.
Lois Eve Anderson.
Paul Van Zuiden.
Greg Perzados. Ben Summers.
I'm Pastor Jeffrey. One thing we didn't talk about last week about prayer is prayers of petition, which is pretty much what it sounds like, asking God for things. We did define prayer more last week in terms of contemplation and that sense of rootedness in divine reality that prayer gives us, that allows us to be more present in a sacred sense, in a peaceful sense with others. We didn't really talk about that cataphatic sense of prayer in which you may speak words of praise, you may speak petitions, words of confession, and so on. I didn't mean last week to minimize spoken prayer, but some of us may wonder if we don't really believe in a God who supernaturally steps in and changes the course of someone's cancer diagnosis, for example, then why are we praying for them? We might even pray, Lord, we pray that their suffering may be minimized. We may pray for good news for someone who's awaiting a biopsy report. If we don't really believe in a God who supernaturally intervenes and changes the laws of nature, and maybe some of us do, that's okay. If we don't, then what's the benefit of prayers of petition for ourselves or for others?
I don't believe that God necessarily steps in to intervene at prayer, but I'm at the same time not saying that he can't and doesn't. I know a lot of doctors that I've spoken to that have reported changes in improbable, miraculous, that tumors disappear. So or doesn't.
So when it comes to prayer, then what is the purpose of intercessory prayer, if any?
Right.
Yeah, Paul?
Well, my sense of that is that somehow there's a shared sense of comfort or charity. I don't know, but just trying to touch base, if you will, with the person you're thinking about, hopefully helps that person feel a little more comfort, a little better about their situation.
And perhaps telling them that we're praying for them. Right?
Yeah.
We're holding them. I like the phrase holding in heart because all these Christian words, they come with a lot of baggage.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to find new ways and phrases. Hi, Carol. Hi, John. What does it do to us when we hold someone else in heart? Someone who may not know that we are praying for them. What does it do to or for us?
It makes us aware that we are not alone. And that it puts a bond, which in very subtle ways heals part of us.
Yeah.
Because we're less self-centered.
In praise of less self-centeredness in this world, right? So our own capacity for compassion may expand when we remember others in prayer. Amazing. Again, what did C.S. Lewis say last week? Prayer doesn't change God, but it changes us.
Yeah.
And then there's that extension I've heard, I don't know if it's from C.S. Lewis, and if it changes us, it's changed a lot.
And there is a sense of that lightens us. It's a feeling of less weight. It's the brightening of our day.
So if I say, God, I am so fed up, what's the purpose of that kind of a prayer? God, I am sick and tired of. Or, God, I am so grateful for. What's the purpose of that? What's the benefit, if you will?
Self-psychology, if you will. A lot cheaper than going to a therapist.
Yeah.
Now, we might have a therapist in the room.
I know. I didn't say that.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You'll get your bill in the morning.
Yeah,
No doubt.
The therapy of hearing yourself
yeah.
instead of keeping it all pent up, at least you're saying it to someone.
You are in touch maybe more with what's real inside you. Yeah,
I think it helps to put it in words. Be able to articulate it and kind of get it out there and kind of help form an idea of what it is that's bothering you.
okay. So,
Sound like a psychologist.
so I thought I'd start with that because we do have a little extra time today, and because the whole purpose of these 17 weeks is to help us think in a new way, a fresh way, about old ideas. And it's not that old is bad and new is better. It's just as we mature in life, we see things, we have new questions. And I think we need more options maybe than we needed earlier in life. And the simple answers may not work so well as we enjoy, as we mature in life.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is it us maturing? Obviously we are, we're all getting older, but is the religion itself maturing?
Yes.
Well, I think it's going everywhere. You hear these statements about abortion and voting rights and colors, people skin, and for many years, want to do this now, I think, then it should be. I could be going in the wrong direction.
So are there discussions like this that are possible in every faith community?
Sure.
Yes.
Yes, every faith community can have open discussions, questioning
Oh,
the nature of God.
Not all, not every community.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
In hierarchical communities,
You're right.
of which members of our family are involved, a sharing of ideas, looking for alternative aspects is really not part of faith.
Yeah.
It's ex cathedra.
Mhm.
The pastor or the leader, they all listen to obviously him.
Yeah. So I think John's right. It's just all over the board. I think there's some increasing, there's signs in evangelicalism of an increasing tolerance for questions and seeking. And we've seen that in some of the videos recently. A lot of those presenters, remember, are evangelicals. We're going to see another one today by Peter Enns. Peter Enns, E-N-N-S, was actually removed from his faculty position at a Reformed seminary because he just was straying too far. But that didn't mean he didn't have a passion for God. That comes across, his passion for God, and the subject matter is faith. But there are more and more people like that who are questioning hell, for example. Some evangelicals are saying, wait, God is love forever? God's will for us is salvation and communion, eternal communion with God, and yet we're still believing in hell? You're saying God's will not be done? If God's will is intimacy with God at the end? Some evangelicals are thinking this through and saying, I don't believe in hell anymore. Now, you do that in an evangelical circle. If you're a pastor, you lose your job. You're done. You are done, right? But there might be an opportunity for you out there on the speaking trail and writing books. But this is happening. This is
Maybe all
happening.
of this stirring up stirring up all this conversation that's coming to the fore. It is becoming conversation, even though it feels very divisive and
Mhm.
difficult. Maybe
Mhm.
that's kind of moving us forward.
Yeah.
Collectively,
Yeah, and there's,
and the people, and also with as a religion.
and you know, I live in the interspiritual space. That's what how I practice spiritual companionship. That's my side gig. Interspiritual space says at the end of the day, as we explore all the paths and philosophies and practices, we are all experiencing the same divine reality. And there's more and more openness to that, which is not to say that the different paths and traditions don't matter. In fact, you need those fingers, even if each finger is pointing to the moon. The fingers are important, but that there's an increasing eagerness to embrace the fact that your path has something to teach me, and it resonates within my own path. I would like to think that as I'm in the interspiritual space, and I see more and more people interested in that space. So I would like to move on from prayer to today's topic, which is grace and faith. And I begin with this little YouTube video. What is grace?
You're praying.
It's the way of life. You can't live without grace.
Grace is a state of well-being and ease.
That's easy. God's riches at Christ's expense.
Like grace, like saying, like Thanksgiving grace. Yeah, I know that. It's like when you give something, you appreciate something.
I really don't know what grace means. I've heard it around before, but I don't know. Could you tell me, please?
Undeserved forgiveness.
Define grace. It's kind of a hard word to put into words.
Humble yourself and be grateful for everything that's given to you in this life.
Grace is a girl's name. I know a couple girl named Grace. They're pretty cute.
Grace is God's compassion.
If you're talking religion, you know, I mean, religion is it's grace.
Grace is
Sometimes
benevolence that's not particularly deserved or asked for, maybe. Mercy, maybe something like that.
Somebody who's graceful is somebody that's kind of,
poised.
yeah, confident, like certain.
You know, to be honest, Grace, never thought about it.
God gives grace. You know, it's His grace that I have salvation.
Grace? I don't really know. Do you know? I don't know.
I just thought was a good way to introduce grace. The general question, what is it? Okay, I'd like to share a PowerPoint with you. Okay, that's us. Here we are. So last week and this week, next week also, we'll be thinking about Christianity more as relationship rather than religion. The word religion connotes what?
Rules, structure.
The canon,
The canon, meaning?
just a history of scholarship and rules. You know, so there's, you know, you go back to, you got to read it. It's an institution.
Tradition.
Institution.
What about beliefs? Does that associate, is the word beliefs associated with religion?
Subscribe.
Right.
Ways of believing.
And beliefs is often like subscribing to, sort of affirming certain statements.
Religion has a corporate kind of character.
Mhm.
Beliefs is a personal thing.
I think some religions, or churches will put in like their, online, they'll say, this is what we believe. So these are our beliefs, you know. So it's like a blanket statement, but this is what, you know, they believe.
I believe our church does that.
Yeah, I found you guys going to that page on your website. Well, you popped up in my search, but that's immediately where I went to. After seeing the word racism, I was just floored. I was like, who, what church are we talking about racism openly? I was like, I gotta see more, so.
Okay. So I think if you're looking for a new way of understanding Christianity, thinking about spirituality, religion, Christianity as relationship, rather than rules, religion, may be helpful, and even beliefs. You know, our friend Marcus Borg frequently says Christianity is not about beliefs. Now that's a rather absolute statement because beliefs are involved. However, you can have religion without beliefs in a sense, if the emphasis is on relationship. We'll talk a little bit more about that today.
I have a similar feeling, you know, even when I repeat the Apostles' Creed in church, you know, I believe in this and I believe that. I personally don't say that as a statement of my beliefs. I say it as tradition, part of the tradition of being in this church or whatever church that I'm in, where they say that. I'm not against the Apostles' Creed, but the statement that I believe in this and I believe in that, it is not true for me.
I got a note from Chuck saying that he could hear me better than others, so I'm thinking that
maybe that's good.
Maybe that's good. I don't know. Well, since I'm presenting the PowerPoint, let me continue, and then we'll try a different way. Sorry that we're all sort of learning as we go here with the technology. So great, yes.
Charisma is much related to the word charity, but they have such a different context. Have the same root, don't they?
It looks like it. I'm not an expert on that, but I think all those CHAR roots words may come from this basis. So here's some of the etymology of grace, both in English and in Greek. Greek is included here because that's the language of the New Testament, of course. Now there are two words for gifts in Greek, but the word I know is charis. When you hear, just think of the word grace. You know, in terms of religion, in terms of not religion, what comes to mind? What are some of the terms, in fact, that are associated with grace?
Gracefulness.
Yeah.
And graciousness. Both have a giving character.
And those at home, please unmute yourself and join in if you'd like. Annie K? Sophisticated.
That's one word.
Oh, that's someone who has a demeanor of grace, right? Great. Yeah.
To me,
easiness comes to mind.
Ease, easiness. Yeah.
To me, grace is the opposite of instruction. You're going to do it this way and this way and this way, period. And grace is more accepting than issuing orders and expecting them to be either you obey my orders or you're out of luck.
So someone may say, you know, give me a little grace here. right,
Yeah.
right? And if, compassion,
need this.
and Annie Kay, yeah,
I would say, two words come to mind, peace and beauty.
beauty,
So that could be in naturalness and simplicity, or it could be like, in sophistication. But that's what comes to mind when I.
yeah, and Paul, yeah,
Two words came to my mind. One was acceptance. The other is forgiveness.
mhm.
So, yeah.
And what's a grace note in music? Right, ta-da. So it's a little addition, it's a little gimme, it's a little trill, a little extra,
Lightens things up.
lightens things up.
Yeah, that reminds me, I think, well, love, I thought of a gift of something, a gift of yourself, or a gift of love in the Greek agape kind of love.
Mhm.
But it's an undeserved gift.
Ah, now we're moving toward the theological here.
Yeah.
But-
Give people grace because that's what God did. We didn't have to prove anything. We didn't have to follow the 10 Commandments or anything.
Yeah. And even in popular usage, grace implies, I wasn't expecting this. Maybe I didn't even deserve it, but one more, yes,
I was thinking,
Carol?
in line with what Greg was saying, it's kind of free flowing.
Right, because if you only give some
There.
act of nicety or love to someone who deserves it, or it's just a transactional affair.
You don't have
You're
to
nice
do
to
anything
me,
for
so
it.
I'll be nice to you.
Okay,
One of the leaders,
So-
one of the speakers in the video actually said the word undeserved.
right. So here's your basic theological definition of grace. If you graduate from seminary without knowing this, you weren't paying attention. God's unmerited favor.
Okay.
Another word for unmerited is unearned. Peter Enns is going to distinguish between earning and effort. It's coming up in a video here. God's unmerited favor. Christians will take it another step and say God's unearned favor through Jesus Christ. But
Jeffrey, can I say something? I mean,
yes,
this
please,
seems
Chuck.
to be from on high down, and that doesn't do any good if the recipient doesn't feel grace. I mean, I think that there needs to be some below up kind of thought here. Because what good does it do me? Wait a minute. What good does it do me if God gives me grace, but I don't get it?
So that is the second half of today's presentation called faith. Thank you for anticipating that piece of the equation. Grace and mercy and forgiveness are often kind of bundled together. Let's attempt to untangle them a little bit, although they're related for sure. Here's on the right, sort of a little distinction between grace and mercy. There's a word missing there. Mercy is when you are spared from the bad things you deserve. I said some questions for reflection on the left. The third question and the fourth question, I think, to me, they are the most powerful questions. If grace is all the good things that come to us without our deserving, our earning, our asking for them even, is there anything that isn't grace? Isn't just the fact that there's a universe and this sun and this planet, and that we woke up this morning and that our parents had us, our breathing, this circle? I didn't ask to be born. It happened. Grace can become a frame through which to understand religion, can also become a frame through which to understand life and appreciate life. You can look at the story of Noah and the ark, for example, and you can see destruction because it's in there. Right? I mean, God destroys the whole blankety blank planet and everybody on it. And yet we say, this is a great children's story. Let's paint it as a mural on the wall. Or the reason I think it's told, I hope, is there's a remnant that's saved. So in mercy, God saves some. Seeing the story of Noah's Ark through the eyes of grace rather than the eyes of reward and punishment is a way of saying that God will always somehow see us through as a species, as a planet. Yeah.
That's interesting because in that beginning of the story, as I remember it, God was punishing.
Yes, yes.
So it's sort of like God
So-
punishes and then gives the grace.
So it's about a frame and a lens. There's so much of life that it is how we see it. And I'm saying you can read the Bible with the lens of, yeah, this is what happens when people disobey. Or God is trying to work with us here for a future. You can get either of those are perfectly good understandings of many Bible stories. Just an illustration there. Yes, Paul?
Just real quickly.
Yeah.
I find it interesting that God said he would never destroy all humanity again after the flood. It was like God, I really shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
Right. Smack yourself upside the head.
Right. So God gives God a little grace there. Second thought.
That's a good one. I never thought about that, God giving God grace.
There's a time in my life when I had a basic understanding of God as grace. Not just the products of grace, but grace itself. That every time anything happens to me that I don't deserve or earn, that is pure gift, that's God. That doesn't distinguish the giver from the gift. That's the problem with that. But I think it's an acceptable. It's a pretty good, perhaps, way of understanding what God is all about. So if it's not God, it's perhaps at least understanding of God's activity in the world. In other words, God is for us, not against us. God wants our flourishing, our growth, our healing. God is for us, not against us. I mean, that's a basic insight of the Apostle Paul. Here's a little distinction between forgiveness and grace. Again, a lot of people just conflate them. Peter Enns, again, will cover this. Forgiveness and grace are often thought to be the same thing, but a lot of theologians consider grace to be the umbrella term under which all these examples of grace, these manifestations of grace operate. Forgiveness is one, it's an important one. And other examples of grace from you?
I think accepting things the way they are, and not the way I wish they were in an ideal world. Well, the world we do is ideal, rather than going off in my mind about the way it ought to be.
Yep.
This is the way it is.
And grace comes to us not just despite the bad things, but sometimes through them. And we're going to go to a little Pauline reference to that. If the world were perfect, everything would be grace. And we wouldn't even recognize grace.
Well, maybe we ought to change our definition of perfect.
Oh.
I think perfect is one of those words.
Can't hear you.
Yeah.
I think that the word perfect is an idealistic term rather than just accepting the conditions that we I think often of Jesus saying, the kingdom of God is at hand. The kingdom of God is here. It's at hand. Well, so let's live like it, you know?
Here are some quick Bible verses about grace. I did not expect that bar to be up there at the top, so you can't read that. 1 Corinthians 15:10. It's interesting, this verse, you can see a little bit of it there. Paul announces that grace is a free gift at the top, basically, and that God's grace has been at work in his life. Remember Paul, who was going in one direction, God said, no, go this direction. And he says, God's grace has not been in vain in my life. But then it sounds to him in his mind, apparently, that, oh, I think I'm boasting a little too much here. I better bring it back. Even though, yes, I worked harder than all these other people. But even that response to grace, my work in the field, persecutions and shipwrecks and all these things that I've endured on behalf of the gospel, that too has been God's grace in my life, that I've been able to respond to the grace with good works. Paul also says in 2 Corinthians that he's given a thorn in the flesh. I don't know if you've heard that phrase. I think it's a popular English phrase. No one knows what Paul's thorn in the flesh was, but it troubled him enough that he asked God, or the Lord, probably Jesus, to remove it. And each time it was not removed, whatever the thorn in the flesh was, psychological, physical, we don't know, social, we don't know. But then Paul recounts that Jesus' message back to him was this famous line, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness.
Complete.
Perfect, complete, full, evident. This is Paul's basic theology, is that God doesn't love us because we're perfect, but God works through us when we're not. The other image he gives elsewhere in 1 or 2 Corinthians is the broken vessel. We are all cracked pots. But it's through those fissures in the ceramic pot that God is able to heal, and that light is able to come, and so on.
Maybe God's the glue that holds us together.
Yes, and another video I reviewed for today, but we're not showing, is from Richard Rohr, who defines grace as God's, like the glueness of God, or God's glue, or something like that. I've got it written down here somewhere. The last verse here, Ephesians 2, probably not written by Paul, but it's Pauline-esh. Goodness glue. Grace is God's goodness glue.
That's good.
Sorry?
Easy to remember.
Easy to remember, GGG.
That's good.
Ephesians 2, for by grace you've been saved through faith. This was Luther's and Calvin's flag. This is their motto. For by grace you've been saved through faith. This is the Protestant Reformation, by the way. Not by our works, not by empty ritual, not by church membership, by faith. You've been saved through faith. This is grace. And this is not your own doing, the gift of God, just to put a finer point on it. It's not what you do, it's what God does. Not the results of works, to put a finer point on it, so that no one may boast. That's a very Pauline phrase. For we are what God has made us, created in Christ Jesus for good works. So it's because we were created for goodness that grace is given to us. So there is a connection between grace and our own efforts to enact grace in the world. And for Christians, grace is known in Jesus Christ, most fully, most clearly, if you will. And this is from the prologue of John's Gospel. Grace is mentioned 3 times in these verses, ending with this beautiful phrase, grace upon grace. It's like if grace isn't enough, we're going to add another layer of the grace icing on this cake. Yeah, Paul?
If you don't have faith, do you still have grace?
Hold on to that thought. Faith is coming. This is actually one of the great art theological debates Paul has touched upon, whether grace is truly irresistible or not. That's one of the debates of the Reformation. I just wanted to share this beautiful rendering of Matthew 11 from Eugene Peterson's The Message. It's a paraphrase of the New Testament, written by a pastor who's also an expert on Greek. This is that phrase, this is that passage where Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." This is Eugene Peterson's beautiful rendering of it.
Yeah, I like that better than follow me, which is the kind of translation of that. I think this is here it comes out strong, more strong.
It's like, who doesn't want that?
Company that in relationships between all of us.
I have bolded that phrase, learn the unforced rhythms of grace. That this may be the most well-known phrase from Eugene Peterson's rendering of the Bible. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. Now, is there effort involved?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Effort,
How to
yes.
see it, how to-
Earning, no.
How to accept it.
Faith, I know you've been eager for this. Here's some definitions of faith. And let's keep Chuck's good question in mind and Paul's as well. Faith is, above all, openness and act of trust in the unknown. Now, what I love about this quote is it's from Alan Watts, who is not a Christian. He's a scholar and practitioner of Zen Buddhism. Again, this is the interspiritual world where one tradition's teaching intersects with the teaching of another tradition in a way that reinforces both of them. There's something universally true within the traditions. So if a Zen Buddhist can have the same exact definition of faith that a Christian has, it's like, what is that? What's going on with that? Faith is openness and act of trust. So is effort involved?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
An act of trust.
We call it a leap.
A leap of faith, an act of trust, stepping out. So keep that in mind as we think a little bit more about faith. Elton Trueblood, the 20th century Quaker, philosopher, writer, theologian. Here's the distinction between faith and beliefs. And again, Peter Enns will get a little bit more into that.
Truth, the word truth.
Belief, yeah, faith is not belief without proof.
That's why they're not good. Remember the boson-Higgs particle, the God particle?
Yes, right.
What kind of God could you prove? Empirical science, I can prove this true.
If we take God out of the equation and you kind of look at spiritual matters in a non-theistic way and speak in terms of perhaps a universal consciousness, that the universe has a kind of goodness within it. Let's use broad terms here. It still takes trust, an act of trust, to put yourself into that world every day, right? Because there's as much evidence that that's not true as there's evidence that it is true, right? There's a kind of a need to get out of bed in the morning and say, at the end of the day, I mean, end of all things, I'm going to kind of put one foot in front of the other because I think I'm walking into goodness. I'm surrounded by goodness. There's goodness in me. There's goodness in my neighbor, even that neighbor who drives me crazy. This is an act of faith, if you will. And another quote by Edith Hamilton, who's a classicist and a scholar of mythology. She really puts the emphasis here on faith as activity, contrasting it to belief, which she understands as passive. I'm not sure what she means here. What do you think she might mean, that belief is passive, faith is active? But she's clearly distinguishing them here. First line is faith is not belief. Yeah, Annie Kay?
When we were talking about religion, I was thinking about the difference between religion and being religious. And it seemed to me that if I say I'm religious, that's more active and it's coming from within. And I think that's how I understand faith as well.
Yeah, John?
How about the first passage in the Bible, now by faith, hope, and charity or love, and the greatest of these is love. So faith is sort of like downhill from what you have.
Yeah.
I kind of like that idea. I think love is both just the thought of love and doing it, and living a life of love. That's what's really important. And the faith business maybe is a reflection of that, but I'm not sure that I have to believe in anything except what can be proven scientifically.
Yeah, my favorite quote is from one of my favorite quotes from Mark Twain, who said in The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, "Having faith is believing in something you just know ain't true." If that's faith, I'm not sure that, if it requires belief in things you know are not true, I'm not sure that's really faith. Sounds like you're just going along. I'm getting messages from people online that they're still not able to hear. We are still obviously learning this whole system. I am still learning it. I think I need next week to make a change here in my computer so that the speaker is the OWL system. I thought we had it that way, but apparently not. So please try to speak up if you can. We're almost done.
Isn't there a scripture about faith? I can think of it. I can't think of the name.
I'm sorry?
There's one scripture about faith.
Hebrews.
Yeah, Hebrews 12, I think it is. Faith is the evidence of things not seen. Yeah. I chose these two images. If you want an image of faith, I think it could be either of these. I've said it this way: faith isn't so much going out and doing something to earn grace, but it is doing something to be open to receiving grace. So to Chuck's earlier question, is grace effective when there is no receptivity on the other end? I think that's more or less kind of where Chuck was going. Maybe not. Now, pure Calvinists would say grace is irresistible. If God's will is for us to experience grace, God's will not be thwarted because God is God. God can't be thwarted. Calvin, sort of. However, those on the free will side, Methodists, Baptists, probably Congregationalists, I suppose, even though we kind of come from Calvin, would emphasize the free will part. Like, no, if this is your attitude, not this, you've got to change this to this. And that requires some kind of effort. But it's not either or necessarily. It might be kind of both and, in that I always say to people, if you kind of put yourself in the place where grace might drive by, if you kind of keep your eyes open looking for grace, you might notice more grace. The pure Calvinist view is God either gives it to you or God doesn't. But there's that wonderful story in the New Testament Jesus tells about the mustard seed of faith, which indicates that maybe it just takes just a tiny speck of faith for us to be open to the flood of grace. And maybe each person has built within them the capacity for some faith. But God, if God is God, can use that small capacity to open themselves up to greater. However, some people just see the whole world as grace and without any difficulty or obstruction at all. So I understand Calvin, I understand the Baptists and Wesley also in this matter. Another image of faith is the falling backwards. This certainly takes effort, but more than effort, it takes trust. So faith is better understood, not as belief, but ultimately as trust. And I thought we were going to get to Peter Enns today. It looks like we're not. That's okay, because we have next week. Here's a final quote by our founder, Martin Luther, as Protestants: faith itself is a gift. I love thinking that everything's grace, even faith. Even if it's that tiny mustard seed speck of faith, there's a capacity within us, maybe that we're born with, to be more trusting than we are at this moment. More trusting of God, of others, of life, of the goodness that's abundant. Can you share your reflections on today's conversation?
So two things: no species has ever survived on this planet. I just threw that out there.
Thanks.
And the Neanderthals have us by 200,000 years as a successful species. So we have to challenge. The other thing is Calvin's unconditional or grace depends on if you are the irresistible grace depends upon if you are part of the unconditional elect. Right, for Calvin. If God chose you, you'll get the grace.
The fact that we are, has for most of my life convinced me of the presence of God.
The fact that, say that again.
The fact that we are and are part of the infinite, and that's a key word, infinite universe, beyond which we still, with all of our scientific expertise, we have not plumbed the depths of. And there's only one word that I can embrace that, and that is God.
I might add to that comment that it's only the idea that this is the world and everyone has to get along. So if we do something that makes sense, then we can be more optimistic. Is that group thinking, or is that, I mean, or is that God's thinking? I have this this thought in mind all morning, and some quotes that said religion was the reason for religion was to keep us all in line. I don't mean to shoot the whole morning with that, but I struggle with that.
There's a more positive way of saying that, and that religion has the benefit of keeping us together.
That's better, yeah.
Relationship, to use the relationship word. And
I'm thinking of you know, what we read in the newspaper and in history with the Indians, and how if they'd gotten along better instead of fighting each other, there would have been enough water and food, and maybe they wouldn't have. You know, it goes on and on.
Well, the word religion means to bind, to tie, to bind, to tie.
To relate.
Right, so relate, be responsible, not just for yourself, but for others, right? It's built into religion. Religion has a lot of other negative connotations, but it also has some positive.